So in that Alabama-Ole Miss game, Alabama started incredibly slow. In the first 15 minutes of the game, they had scored just 23 points. They were down by 14, and it was looking very bleak. Alabama ends up going on a 16-5 run to end the half to only be down 3 at half. It was 42-39 at half. They end up scoring 64 in the second half to end up eclipsing the century mark for the 9th time this season. You'll remember me talking about, the 100-point scoring, or if you've read any of the articles I've written on Substack, that this is the 9th time the university, or that Alabama has eclipsed that 100-point mark. This officially ties the SEC record for 100-point games. That record that they're tying is the 95-96 Kentucky team. And again, they have a few games left to play. So if Alabama can eclipse the 100-point mark another time, this will be the most 100-point games by an SEC team ever. The other thing that's just insanely impressive about that game is you'll remember me saying that they had scored just 23 points in the first 15 minutes of the game. So from the last 25 minutes of the game, Alabama scored 80. Part of that was due to shots falling. Part of that was due to, getting open shots and getting shooters the ball. And part of that was just due to Alabama stepping up on the offensive rebounding. Alabama was not doing well. I talked in the pre-game or the preview of the game about Alabama should be able to have a lot of success in the interior on rebounding because Ole Miss is one of the worst defensive rebounding teams in the country. At the very beginning of the game, Alabama was not doing a very good job on the rebounding. They were also having some issues in transition, and that's the worst of both worlds, right? Usually it's a situation where you're either crashing the glass or you're getting back in transition. Alabama actually had a possession where they didn't crash the glass, they didn't get the rebound, and then Ole Miss had a 2-on-0 for an easy layup, right? So this was a situation where Alabama was getting out-efforted. Ole Miss was playing better defense. Alabama was just missing some shots, but Ole Miss was playing a little bit better defense, and Alabama just did not look like they were ready to play. Cut to that 5-minute stretch, Alabama hits a few threes in a row. Mark Sears hit a big one. Aaron Estrada hit a big one. Grant Nelson hit a big one. They go into halftime just down 3 and then never really looked back. Alabama is then able to stretch it out to a pretty good lead on top of some big Rylan Griffin threes. Rylan ends up hitting 4 threes in the second half. And then as Ole Miss tries to fight back, a huge game out of Davin Cosby. And so I really want to talk about Cosby. He's, as for anybody that may not know, Cosby is a freshman this year. He joined the team last season. He didn't play at all last season. However, he was ejected from a game. If anybody will remember the Iron Bowl of basketball last year, when there was the benches clearing, he actually got ejected from a game that he never actually played in. But, Davin Cosby has played limited minutes this year. He's even had 9 games that he didn't appear in at all. But Davin comes in the absence of Reitzel. Reitzel's out for the 3rd game in a row. And Davin is up to the challenge. He did not replace Reitzel from a defensive standpoint. Davin is still, getting up to speed on the defense and is still working on that side of the ball. However, from an offensive standpoint, Davin is always ready to let it fly. And he goes 5 for 10 from 3. So I thought that was huge off the bench. Nate mentions in the press conference post-game that Davin was playing as Matt Morrell on the scout team and ends up going 11 for 22 as well as playing some better defense. So that was part of the reason, that and the effort that he had showed in practice was part of the reason why he wanted to get Davin into the game early. And you saw Davin around 13 to go in the first half. But then Nate also mentions that those threes in the second half were as big as anything, and Alabama doesn't win the game without those. And I think that really comes to fruition because Davin hit some shots in some big moments where it looked like Ole Miss was going to be able to get a run started to start coming back, and were just some big game-sealing shots. Really, this was a game of the backcourt because the 2 other guys that start in the backcourt, and Aaron Estrada and Mark Sears, both had phenomenal games of their own. I've been a fairly outspoken person that both of these guys are really, really good. However, in that Kentucky game, they had just not played up to their standard. Both of them did in this game. Aaron Estrada records the first triple-double since Kyra Lewis and only the fourth ever in Alabama basketball history. He goes 18, 10, and 10 to go with just one turnover on 10 assists. That's phenomenal. And then Mark Sears. Mark Sears ends up dropping 26 points. He has 5 rebounds. He has 3 steals, 4 assists, and plays all 40 minutes of the game without a single turnover. That is the level of guard play that you're going to need coming into this Tennessee game, and we'll talk about it here in a minute. But a game where your guards have 14 assists to just 1 turnover from your main guards is phenomenal. That is as perfect of an offense as Nate wants it to be. That's keeping everything moving in transition. That's finding the right man. That's exactly the style of offense that Alabama wants to play, and that is Alabama's offense at its absolute finest. So, want to shout out both of those guys. They had as good of games as you could have asked for. Mark has his, I believe, 17th, 16th, 17th, 20-point game of the season. So, Mark is on a tear. It's going to really, the SEC Player of the Year race may come down to this game in Tuscaloosa. A lot of people think it's Dalton Connects to lose, but if Mark puts on a show and Alabama ends up beating Tennessee, you never know what's going to happen. But those two are definitely 1A, 1B for the SEC Player of the Year race. It's going to be a really, really good game on Saturday. So that's really the big things. The other thing I want to mention for the game is Alabama just showed a fight, again, similar to the Georgia game. It was a little different because in the Georgia game, it was mostly centered around rebounding. But Alabama showed a fight to come back from 14 down and win the game, and win the game going away. They ended up winning the game by 15 points. So I thought that was really, really big. Having these big wins on the road, showing that they can do it is big. The one thing that I will say about the game that's a little disheartening, and it's something that I talked about in the preview, and I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, but Ole Miss ends up, they close it to a 15-point game, and that's on the back of they had 28 points from Allen Flanigan. Allen Flanigan does end up playing in this game. He is not suspended as many fans expected him to be or assumed was required for him to be per the NCAA guidelines on a fighting act. So it was a little confusing as to how he even played in the game. But Chris Beard decides to suspend him by having him not start in the game. So Allen Flanigan does not get in the starting lineup. The really confusing part to that on me is Allen Flanigan records the third most minutes on the entire team. He played more minutes than the guy who started above him on the team, and he didn't even make it to the first media timeout before he got subbed in. It was just 3 minutes into the game, and Allen Flanigan is back into the game. So it's just super confusing to me how this is allowed to continue. Ole Miss, for as good a game as it was, Allen Flanigan kept Ole Miss in that game, and it was a situation where Allen Flanigan shouldn't even been playing in the game. When you look at the reason that McGee got suspended for Florida, Flanigan should have been suspended for this Alabama game for the exact same reason. Alabama was able to win going away in spite of it, but it's still, in my opinion, just a travesty by the SEC and by the NCAA that they even allowed him to play in this game, because per the letter of the law, based on the NCAA guidelines, if you commit a fighting act, you're supposed to be suspended for the next game. It doesn't matter if you were assessed a flagrant 2 during the game that happened or not. You're supposed to be suspended. So the fact that he even played in this game is really disheartening. But, Alabama wins going away. There were a few more fouls in the second half than you would ideally want. Ole Miss lived at the free throw line. That is something you're going to want to watch for this Tennessee game. It's something that Alabama had issues with earlier in the season. And, it seems to have been getting a little better where they weren't fouling quite at the same level. Part of that's due to the rotations that they're doing down low with limiting McGee's minutes. And, Pringle's been doing a little better at not committing quite as many fouls. So that is kind of where you've seen some success. But that is something to watch for going forward, hoping that the foul numbers don't creep up like they have been doing. So that's really all I have for the Ole Miss game. It was a really good game. The fact that Alabama was able to come back, they limited turnovers. They got better rebounding. They ended up winning the rebounding battle, even though they were down I believe 6 or 7 at the half. It's a really, really good end of the game, really good final 25 minutes to be able to score 80 points. You're a little concerned at the lackluster start in Oxford, and it really concerns me for the game in Gainesville coming up next midweek on Tuesday. We'll talk about that one in the next podcast, but that game does concern me just due to Alabama, how they've been playing on the road